the sake of the recording, I'm Josh. Hi. We'll go back and do the little how I learned to stop worrying and love development. So that's what this is. Good times. All right, back ahead. Cool. Well, it's really been fun. This is my second time back here to speak. I love this meetup because I love Ruby and I love Rails. And if you saw my last talk, you know that I really, really love RSpec. I'm a very big fan. And getting to move into working in Ruby a couple years ago through a connection through this meetup and Patrick over there was really exciting. And I love these tools and the productivity they provide. They really are my favorite. And as I've gotten in the last year or so to work with iOS, going to try out some JavaScript now coming up. But Ruby is really my ecosystem of choice. I really, really love it. So it's encouraging to hear new bootcamp graduates that are looking to get into Ruby. That's really great. But the thing actually that I love the most about the Ruby community isn't the language or the frameworks. And the reason why is because I've found in my experience that languages and frameworks don't address the fundamental problems that I run into as a software developer. There was a time earlier in my career, up until really just a couple years ago, where languages and frameworks was the whole focus. I thought that the new ones would solve all my problems, they'd get through, and there are definitely improvements. But I was still experiencing the same stresses, the same long hours, the same missed releases and things like that, and just all the tools in the world didn't seem to be solving the problems. And so when I came to the Ruby world, I kind of was still sort of looking for tools and for frameworks and languages. But the thing that really helped, and it really did help, but it wasn't the languages and frameworks, it was the methodologies, agile development practices. And so the word agile, of course, has been thrown around and means so many different things and so many. We may even be through being burnt out on it. Like it may just be like just not even talked about anymore, maybe. But when I say agile development practices, all I really mean is the way you go about writing and changing your code. And I'm not talking about the kind of fake agile, the over-designed agile that's just as bogged down in heavyweight processes as old school waterfall approaches. I'm talking about the kind of real agile that lets you deploy frequently, safely, and lets you make quick changes in response to business needs. That's the kind of approach that's been hugely transformational for me. But there was a time, and really a year or two, where I was reading all about these practices, and I'll fill in the details of what those mean in the course of this talk. But I was reading about agile practices, and it was all very exciting, very interesting, but it was really hard for me to get started. And so I'm kind of curious to get input from y'all, if any of you fall in the same boat. Is there anyone here who has tried to apply agile practices, whatever you would fill in that term to mean, and you haven't really been able to make it work? Tried to apply agile practices and haven't been able to make it work? Okay. How about anyone who's, maybe you feel like you kind of get it, but you've tried to teach your team agile practices and they haven't been able to get it? Anyone experience that? Okay, one or two, all right. So that's kind of really where I was. And I'd love to help with that by telling a story. The story of how I finally feel like I was able to get my start in agile development practices. I still feel like I'm getting started, but I feel like I've got traction, whereas I never had traction before. And the reason I want to tell a story is because it wasn't something where I just read it in a book and then I was good to go. It was a process. It was a gradual growth in practices, gradual growth in craftsmanship. And my hope for y'all listening to this is that as the story progresses, see if you can recognize where you are at in the story. See if something resonates with you, or maybe recognize where your team is. Like, oh, that's the point that they've come to so far. And I'm hoping something about the story will be helpful, giving you or your team a place to get started, get some traction like I eventually did, and make some progress and apply some practices that actually solve the fundamental problems that go with you language to language and framework to framework. So we're going to get into the story, and it's a story about worry, as you might have guessed from the talk title. So go back maybe 5 years in my development career. I've been a developer, I guess, about 15 years now. Going back about 5 years, I was worried. My worry at the time was, will I get the code done in time? So I'm going to have a constant refrain as we go through here. If this is a major worry for you right now in the last couple months at your job, raise your hand. All right, that's a pretty common one. Yeah, this is not rare. So this was something, it kept me up at night. I'm kind of a worrier. Kept me kind of high anxiety. I remember a job where I was looking to leave because I felt like it was super high pressure. And one of my coworkers, in interviewing a new person, he said, hey, this is a great place to work. It's lower stress than anywhere I've worked. And I'm like ready to leave because of the stress. So I'm a worrier. You'll get to know me over the course of the next 45 minutes. And And so, but there's something behind this worry. Like there's some substance there. So behind this worry, will I get the code done in time? There's a real need, and the need is for predictability. What I was experiencing was, thought something was going to be done in a week, took a month. Thought something was going to take a long time, and it came in shorter. That was rarer that happened. But predictability is a real need, not just for project managers, not just for business folks, but for you as a developer. You want the predictability of knowing, getting some kind of sense of how long things are going to take to help you plan, to help you navigate those conversations with the business, with your clients. So see if this phrase is familiar. We're about 90% done. What happens after the we're about 90% done? That's when you get started on the second 90% to actually reach the end there. So that's something I can definitely identify with. And so the Agile practice, the development practice that really helps with this is user stories for me. This is, of the practices, this is the one that is a bit more potentially on the project managery side of Agile. And that's the side of Agile that tends to scare us away and get us not very interested in it. But as a developer, I love user stories. And because it helps me focus and it brings predictability. And so I want to walk through an example of a user story real quick, and then we'll talk about why that's helpful for predictability. So there's lots of ways to describe user stories, lots of levels of detail, but like here's one, just a one-sentence version. As a user, I want to view a product, e-commerce system, so that I can decide if I want to purchase it. So this is a way to slice the functionality and say, okay, right now what I'm going to build is just what's needed for this user story and no more. So some of y'all may be more familiar than others at thinking this way. So if you know where I'm going with this, maybe share a little bit, but don't take all the answers for everyone else. But I really want to get some input from y'all to answer the question for this story, and I really should have kept it up on the screen. Sorry about that. So think about this story, and I'm going to ask and get y'all's input on what do we need to build? What is absolutely needed to build to make this function in our app? As a user, I want to view a product so I can decide if I want to purchase it or not. So what do we need in order to allow users to view a product? What do we need to build in Rails? Database of products? Okay, I'll come back to y'all in just a second. What needs to be in the database of products for you or others?
Well, it's going to have a link to a container with an image to be able to see the product.
Yeah, image of the product. Yeah, that makes sense. Because we're specifically talking about a user viewing. We haven't listed out all the requirements here, but that's the kind of thing you'd want on a view product page. What else?
A name in the database?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, basic fields that are shown on that screen. Get a hand back there. Taking the Uncle Bob approach of we don't have to store it in a database.
One page, one picture, you're done.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. I follow the Rails doctrine, and so I get my database just right out of the gate. But yeah, you're right. You could actually absolutely take the approach of the story that we don't need a database for the sake of this story. That's a great point.
All you need is an image set.
There you go. Did someone say something about indexes a second ago?
Do we need any markup at all? We just need an HTML page to satisfy this story.
Did we say it's a website? I mean, if you want to question everything. Yeah.
This blank case.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. Cool. Well, let's.
You talk about Rails, so you talk about like I need a route with an action that's got a view behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. So an action with a view behind it for what specifically?
I would imagine we're like being good Rails build can have like an index action that's got a list view behind it.
Yeah. So you're talking. So how about how are we going to get the data into the database? Do we need the admin screen? Fake it? Yeah. Yeah. This is more well known in the Rails world than in other communities. But like we don't need an admin screen to get to do this story. Like really, we just need the data to be there. Maybe not even in the database, as he pointed out. Yeah. So we can fake the data. So let me list out what I said. I said, we need a product table, but really we only need the user visible columns. You can get into a long time of just spinning your wheels trying to define your whole data model up front, but just what do we need to show on the page? We need the product model, object, active record, of course. There are no other options that have any benefits at all. No. I've only ever used active record. We need a controller with only maybe the show method if we're just looking up a single product. And again, that's not a very clear user story, but just trying to give a sense. A product view page with styling. Like I would do styling as a part of the story. And a product database seed script. I think more significant is what we don't need, and this is a big difference with sort of an agile development mindset. We don't really need internal use columns for the product table, like internal identifiers, things about shipping or weight or anything like that, just what's needed to see for the user to see on the page. We don't need create or edit screens because that's something going to come later. Like you could tie up a whole bunch of time making those, whereas for this story, just to do this one piece now, all you need is the view page. We don't need a user model. Like we don't need to log in necessarily. I mean, depending on your system, you don't really need to log in to see the product because we're not buying it yet or anything like that. Really, we're talking about the concept of layers. If you think of layers in terms of like your models, views, and controllers, a more traditional application approach is to do one layer at a time. Like back before the Agile days, it's like, let me define my whole database schema. And now that that's done, let me define all of my controller layer. Then let me get all of my pages out there, and now let me style all of them. So you do one layer at a time, and you build up the cake, the bottom, and the next, and next. But the thing about layers is that layers separate things that are different. And things that are different may take different amounts of time. And so when you're thinking of going back to the idea of predictability, being able to have a sense for yourself or for your client of how long something's going to take, the vertical slices provide a more consistent data about effort than horizontal layers. So if you spend the whole first 2 weeks or month building out the database, you now know in depth all of what's needed to solve the problems of the database, but you have no feedback yet about how long it takes to style the screen. Is your designer going to be super nitpicky and pixel perfect, or are they going to be flexible and work with you? And so if you take a slice at a time, if you just do that one user story, now you've got a little sample of a little bit of database work, a little bit of controller work, a little bit of view work, a little bit of styling. And now you've got a sense of, OK, that feature takes this long. Maybe now I can predict how long other features take a little bit better. And I've definitely found that taking a user story approach can provide more predictability there. And it doesn't mean you're going to know up front exactly how long the project's going to take. But as you go, week by week, story by story, you're going to get more data. Whereas if you just build out the database from the start and finish the whole thing, you have no data yet about what the view layer is going to look like. Same thing would apply if you're building out a separate JavaScript single page app in Angular or React or Ember on top of things. If you're building that out, whether it's one developer or multiple developers, if you save that for the end once you've built out your API, you don't have any feedback about how long the front end will take. The book, I think, as far as I can tell, one of the places that really originated the concept of user stories is this one, Extreme Programming Explained. So extreme programming is an early Agile approach. And user stories are just one of the things that the book touches on briefly. So there's a bunch of other really valuable stuff there. But if you want to learn about user stories, this book would be a great one to check out. So I was applying user stories. This happened. This became a focus of mine in my development career maybe 4 years ago. And it really helped. I had real productivity, real predictability. And my project managers were loving it. They were trying to get me to help other teams with it. And so life was good. I was feeling great. I guess there was iPhones. Yeah, 5 years ago. I definitely had one of those. So life was good. But then I got worried. And the worry this time was, will I break something? If this is a major worry for you in your work right now, raise your hand. It's a little lower. This is the Rails world. You can probably guess where this is going as far as Agile practices.
All the time. It's no big deal.
Yes, it's part of the process.
Then you do the refactoring, the test passes.
Yeah, there you go. I'll have to think about that one later. So will I break something? And there's an interesting sequence here about these practices where if you work in terms of user stories, if you're building a small piece of functionality at a time, if you're working iteratively and you build something and then you change it to handle the needs of the next user story, you're actually a little bit more likely to break something because you're making changes versus if you just build the whole database once and then you never change it again, if you can actually accomplish that. So you're in the same code over and over again. You're more likely to break something, I think, in my experience, if you're doing user stories. So the need for reliability has increased. You always need reliability, but it's gone up because you're changing code over and over again. So again, this reliability is a real need that is behind that worry that I have or that you may have. And so let's talk about how you get reliability and why we struggle with getting reliability. So I have what is popular these days, the very super scientific graph with no numbers on either scale. And this is, so over time, this is this time in your project as you're going from start and continuing onward. And we're talking about lines of code, an amount of code, number of classes, whatever kind of quantitative measure you want to use. So assume you have like the same team size. It's one person, it's 8 people, 30 people, whatever it is. So over time, the amount of code that you produce is going to stay more or less constant. Like, it gets more complicated than that, but let's say that, it kind of order of magnitude, it stays about the same. You're not, exponentially increasing how much code that you can write. But if that's the case, then the total amount of code in your project as things go increases as increases. So if you want to regression test your app, if you are changing things throughout it and you want to make sure you haven't broken anything, so you want thorough testing, how much, and we're not talking about automated testing right now or manual testing, just like to get the coverage, how much testing effort is needed if over time? Is it a constant amount of testing effort or is it an increasing amount of testing effort? Why do you say that? Because,
Test all new code plus all the retro code.
right.
Retrospective testing.
Yeah.
Plus all the interactions.
Yeah.
Like connections start to be more complicated.
Yeah. I was thinking about that recently. Like the idea of the interactions, it may actually be more like, yeah, the complexity of the testing may actually be above the total number of lines of code.
Get all the user interaction stuff that your test suite doesn't cover.
Right. Yeah.
Unless you cover that.
Oh, we just got all architectural. Yeah. So at a very basic level, the amount of testing that would be needed to thoroughly make sure your app keeps working is increasing over time. And so,
You should use static languages instead of this dynamic crap.
yes, types, man. It's good. So what do you do? So what are some options as the amount of code to test grows? And this is, I'm going to be talking in other language communities about this, but for Rails, I'm not going to let you answer here because I'm going to go down the manual testing route. So you can spend more of your time testing. Like if you're testing by hand, you can take longer and longer each time you add a new feature. That is not the kind of thing that a developer is usually into. You can hire more testers. And so you can just tell the company that just over time, year over year, the budget you need for salaries for testers is going to double and triple and quadruple, and see how that goes. You can test less of your app. This is what I've generally done in environments where we have not had automated testing is, all right, well, we're just going to test the new stuff and maybe the most critical stuff. And so there's just larger and larger swaths of your app that we have no idea if they're working or not. So our end users end up being our testers, and if they care to tell us if they're broken. But of course, there's a fourth option, and in the Rails community, the Ruby community, we're pretty familiar with this. It's automated testing. So really what automated testing lets you do is offload behavior verification to the computer. So as that time increases, you can let the computer increase in effort, the effort that it's doing to test things, instead of you or a testing team increasing in effort. Of course, if any of y'all have worked on really big Rails apps like that, even that automated time can start to become a problem. I have not worked there, but I have heard of such things, so I don't have the answers there. But waiting longer for an automated test to finish is sure a lot better than having to manually click through an hour, 2 hours after every story that you work on. And again, that's a pressure that's going to move you away from working in user stories. Like, why don't I just build the whole database up front? So then now my manual testing is less work, and yet now I've lost that predictability. Just to briefly talk about automated tests, maybe for some of the newer folks that haven't been in it, it could be a good idea. There's lots of approaches. I'd say maybe start with end-to-end tests. I'm going to show an RSpec test. Almost everybody in the room probably has seen it. But so say we're talking about, I've got a different user story here. For checking out in our e-commerce site, it successfully places the order. So you could create a product with Factory Girl. You could visit a products page. I've been working in iOS for the last 6 months, so if you notice any errors, don't tell me. Just be very polite. That'd be great. You could tell me later if you wanted to. But I did an eyeball inspection, so we'll see how this works out. If you notice any Swift code in here, just let me know. So we go to a products page. That's that product page we created before. Now we've built out some more features. We built out the order placing. We click on Add to Cart. We check the path we're on if you want to do that. We click on Checkout. We skip over the payment stuff because that's a nightmare, so I didn't want to put that on the slide. Stripe or whatever, PCI compliance. We click on Place Order. We check that we're on an orders page, and we confirm that it has an order place message, and we confirm that an order was saved to the database. Very basic database testing. I mean, Rails really has really set the standard for what simple automated tests like this can look like, and other communities are playing catch up and trying to build on that and emulate that. And then for unit testing, you can unit test edge cases. This is not really a talk about the details of automated testing, but just trying to talk about the idea of automated testing in general. It's to get that reliability, especially that you may need if you're starting to work user story by user story. So there was a book called the RSpec book that previously was kind of, in my opinion, the gold standard for learning testing approaches like this. It kind of got a little out of date, but a new one just came out in the last couple months. It's called Effective Testing with RSpec 3. It's by Myron Marston and Ian Dees. I'm not sure if Ian is involved, like, on the RSpec core team, but Myron is. It's awesome. I read through it. It's totally up to date. Great processes. Hits Ruby in general, Rails in particular. And I'd recommend this even for folks that are not working in Rails. Like if you're on the front end side, I know the Laravel community in PHP took a lot of inspiration of their testing approach from the RSpec book. And so check it out. Like I'm going to be recommending this to people in any language if they want to learn what testing can really be like to get that kind of reliability we were talking about. So I learned, and this was me. Like I learned this. I was trying to get into it about 3 years ago. Automated testing. It's crazy now to remember a time where I wasn't writing automated tests for my code. And so life was good. Like I got the reliability there, and I was able to deliver stories much better. Then I got worried. And this time, dramatic thunder. That's great. So this time, what I was worried about, here's the fear. Here's what kept me up. When I change something, will lots of tests break? If this is a concern or a worry for you right now, raise your hand. Oh, lower. OK. All right. That's interesting. Yeah, there you go. I've heard experts say that it's good to delete tests, so I do it whenever possible. It's great.
So in other words, the tests are no longer relevant, is your worry?
It's less about that, because that is a case where it's like, I can tell that I no longer need this test. I can delete it. And that is a very valid thing to do. This is more, no, there is still things that I want to be testing here, but just the details of being able to verify that behavior have changed. So although I've been working on one user story and I changed one feature of the app, now there's 10 or 30 tests that are breaking that I need to change all of them with details that aren't relevant to the core of what I'm trying to test there. So that's a great clarification question. Thanks. So really, behind this worry is the need of loosely coupled tests. And this is just the idea that tests, specifically tests that aren't coupled to all kinds of different places in your app. Like your test is going to be tightly coupled to the feature it's testing because it's verifying the behavior of it. But if a test has connections to all kinds of other places throughout your app, then any one of those places that you change is going to break the test. And for folks getting into testing, and especially for folks that have been on apps that have grown years and years and years over time, this can be a major problem to the point that testing is discouraging, tests take forever. And I had this from a guy on a project that I'm on right now. He was like, I've been on projects where the amount of time, like the amount of effort to update all the tests was huge compared to the effort to build the feature. And that effort was huge compared to any benefit we ever got from the test of actually catching a problem. So you might think here, like the first inclination, and my first inclination, all the things that I was Googling for and Stack Overflowing for at first was how do I write better tests? But there's a quote from Kent Beck from that Extreme Programming Explained book that I thought really sums it up and is really insightful. He says, if it's hard to write a test, it's a signal that you have a design problem, not a testing problem. And specifically what he means is you have a problem with the design of your production code, not necessarily a problem with the design of your tests. That's an extreme statement. Like you can write bad tests. That's certainly the case. But he's saying that you should really think about the design of your code. So the Agile development practice that I really found helps with this, I just summarized as object-oriented design. That's maybe a little unfair because people in non-Agile approaches use object-oriented design as well. But this is really captured it for me. This is really what we're thinking about. Changing the design of your code so that it's more amenable to testing in small pieces. So I wanted to jump straight into an example. And we're going to open up for suggestions here. So this will be exciting to see where this goes. So this is a create order class. It doesn't inherit from anything. So I am going off of the Rails orthodoxy here. Don't tell DHH. So it's like a service object. Or a form object. And so this is outside of I've got my controller, but here is like the business logic of what needs to happen to create an order. This is always the example I go to because creating an order is more than just inserting into a database or non-database, as the case may be. But often it's also charging a payment and it's sending out a notification. And so this can be a great way to get those details out of your controller class and into this object. But that's not even the kind of object-oriented design I'm talking about. So in this class, you see here, we're looking into the cart. We have a cart, access to a cart object here. We're summing up the total of all the line items in there. And then if there's a coupon, we're applying it. I've never worked in a system where coupon code is that simple. Anyone ever written coupon code from scratch in an e-commerce system?
Yes.
1, 2.
Actually, my first program in '97 or so
Yeah.
in JavaScript, it had to run in IE3 and Netscape too at the time.
So you're saying that the JavaScript determined what the discount was going to be? You're like, wait a second. So I don't know about y'all that raised your hands. For me, like this e-commerce system.
This was in the '90s.
Yeah.
So at the time, that was the tool. I think there might have been some server-side stuff.
Yeah.
The entire cart system was pure JavaScript at the time. It stored it as an array of numbers and cookies, and then it crossed the CGI down. I don't want to go into it.
CGI.
15-year-old getting paid to do something.
Nice.
for the tools at the time.
Nice. Anyways, this was a side trail to begin with. Coupon code's never usually that simple, is what I was getting at. So once we calculate the total from there, then we charge a credit card processor. Again, I am just glossing over all the details of payment processing, Stripe or Authorize.net, whatever, and then other stuff down below there. This is all we need for the sake of this demonstration, calculating that total and charging it. So here's a test you might write. This is more of a, what goes for a unit test in the Rails world. We've got a couple classes going on, but we'll see where that goes. But I'm trying to test out the processor, and I want to describe for that, not the processor, I see I've gotten confused, the create order service object. I want to confirm that it charges a payment for the total amount. And so how do I do that? Like, okay, well, I'm going to instantiate a user, a cart for that user, and I'm going to add a product. That's 2 products at $5.99 each. And then we need a coupon, because I want to make sure that coupon's being calculated correctly. A coupon for $3. Then the processor, so I'm going to use a mock here. I'm going to be using RSpec and using an instance double to make a fake payment processor here. And so what I'm confirming is when I really call the create order method down there, I want to confirm that it calls through to the processor, and that the processor receives a charge method passing the user and passing $8.98, which if I've done the math right, I think is the total minus the coupon there. So that's what I'm testing. Going through this create order method, that all this stuff runs, and that when that message is sent out to the order processor there, that I'm sending out the right order total. That's what I'm testing here. OK, so question time. What kind of changes in my application could cause this test to break? Cause it to no longer succeed or error out? This is a very open question. What are any kinds of changes to the app that might cause it to break? Go ahead.
You calculate total taxes or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I didn't even include taxes. Seems like that's something that business might want me to do. That's great. Yeah. Hi.
Conditions for coupon, it can be not just price, so days, times,
Yeah.
not just $3. It can be $3 on Friday night.
Yeah, it can be percentages. It can confirm if there's something in there. Yeah. So like, who knows if I'll even be able to instantiate a coupon with that in the future. What else? What other kind of things might be able to change in the app that would break this test?
If a user requires arguments, the user do.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, for right now, I don't. This
Any argument changes to any of these?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Required fields for user.
Required fields, yeah. Yeah, validations on it. Yeah, there's a lot of things that could change. And so this is a fragile test. It works great for now. But that's any number of different features of the app we could be working on where this test would now need to change, even though nothing about the order the create order method charging the processor has changed. And so what's going on here? The root cause of this, the reason that, and there's probably different ways to think about testing approaches and stuff like this, but in this Agile approach, the reason that this test is so fragile, that so many changes could break it, is really because this create order object knows too much. Like all these different things about different objects it's looking into, fields it's going into, how they relate to one another, the conditions it is or isn't going to include. This create order method needs to know about all of them. And if any of those details change, this method call needs to change as well, and the test would need to change. And so really, if we wanted to isolate testing that the create order method called the payment processor properly, like again, say if the main responsibilities of the create order method are to make sure that we do everything that's needed for an order, charge a payment, send a notification email, and save the order to the database. Those are, in my mind, when I've thought about create order service objects in the past, that's the main responsibilities. And really calculating the total is really secondary. That's what's kind of gumming up the works here. So let's look at some of the things we could do. So in here, we're in the create order object here. Looking down at the total here, we could change it to ask the cart for the total instead. You know, up above, if we go back here, we're drilling into the cart, into a lot of the details of what's in the cart, even what's in the line items inside the cart. And we're doing all those calculations here. Really, like, the cart could know that. Like, that's OK to give that knowledge to the cart itself. And then at that point, we're already asking the cart for the user. We could just ask the cart for the total as well. I mean, you're going to need to display the total on the screen anyway. So that's a good idea for multiple reasons. So if we can ask the cart for the total, then this whole section up here for calculating the total, that can just go away. We don't need that at all. And so again, this is a one-line function here. Maybe I could have included the other calls to like the notifier and stuff like that to show that it's more than just one line. But one-line methods aren't necessarily a problem. So the core here, we're asking the cart for the user and the total, and we're sending that to our payment processor, where this is Stripe or AuthorizeNet, PayPal, whatever the new cool thing is that's even cooler than Stripe. And so now going back to our test, this might be a hard question to ask if you don't have the class in front of you. But so looking at this in the create order class now, what can we change in our test? What can get simplified in here? What is not needed anymore? This is the most dramatic meetup talk ever. This is great. I feel like a vampire.
Wait, can you go back to the class again?
Yeah.
So create order has a call, so it takes the constructor takes the cart.
Yeah.
Basically, like the first 4 lines or so. Not necessarily that.
Yeah.
You kind of double cart instead of creating all these things.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So we can change all these, how these are worked. We can just do, and different approaches to doubling, but this is kind of like maybe the simplest possible approach. Just some kind of RSpec double for the user and for the total. The cart, so we're going to do an instance double of the cart because we don't care about the cart itself. And we say, OK, when we talk to the cart, if we ask for the user, give me back that specific double there. If we ask for the total, give me back that specific total. And now, so now we pop that up there. So now the expectation on the processor here is still asking for 898 in particular. I'm still not even actually sure if that was the right number in the first place. I can't do that much math in my head, so who knows? That would be nice to get that out of there. So there's no numbers in the test anymore. So really, this is just changing into total. Like we've just doubled this. And if you haven't worked with like a mocking framework specifically with test double, like specifically with mocks before, this is a really cool thing. And if you get a chance to play with it in RSpec, it's really nice. And that effective testing with RSpec book is a great introduction to the concept of mocks. So here, we don't care what the number is for the sake of this test. There's going to be a separate test for the cart that tests the total calculations. And that'll be the one place you need to change when the calculations for the total differ. Probably I'd even separate out some other place for the coupon calculations, because if there's all the different kind of possibilities for coupons like y'all talked about, that would be nice to isolate that in one place as well. Here, all we care about is that create order service object sends through a message to the payment processor with the right arguments. And so now at this point, like the tests, I mean, it's not super short, but notice the numbers that aren't in here. Notice the math that is not in here anymore. Even the concept of coupons isn't even in this test at all, and that is a really good thing. Again, this is a test that's more on the unit testy side. You would have like an end-to-end test, like we saw right at the start, that would show somebody selecting a coupon and seeing the results, because you want to test things all the way through the process to make sure the pieces fit together. But for the sake of this unit test, testing the create order service object, just being able to limit it to the details. The detail is when this method is called, with these arguments passed to it, this is the message I want to be sent out the other side. And this keeps this unit test very focused. So a great book, not specifically on testing, but on this kind of object-oriented design, very well known in circles. If y'all that are newer to the Ruby world, like you really need to know about this book. It is amazing. Practical Object-Oriented Design in Ruby. This is another one that I recommend to people in any language. I actually first read it at a PHP job when a guy came in and was like, hey, like we want to learn how to do object design in PHP. Let's read this book. It really takes a great agile approach that isn't all kinds of tons of diagrams and stuff like that, but really you're in the code, you're working on things, you're seeing problems and things that are inflexible in the code, and you're making changes. So it's really, really great. So I started applying this approach to object-oriented design, and all of a sudden my tests were much more reliable, they were much less likely to break, and so life was good. Then I got worried. Can't script it any better. It's great. So the worry this time, so we've got some predictability. we've got reliability of the code, and we've got changeability. I forgot the keyword. But we've got the tests are not fragile. But the worry now is, am I going to be able to handle future requirements? Like I built all this code, I built tests around it, so that's even more code. But am I going the right direction? Like, is someone going to come in and say, oh, nope, now all of a sudden let's talk about the database. Like, it's not Postgres, it's MongoDB. Like, they're going to change something out, or like, hey, we're not selling individual products anymore. We're selling subscriptions. Like, am I going to have to say, like, the system I built doesn't do that. Like, we can't do it. Or are they going to ask for a small change, and it ends up being a tremendous amount of time to make it happen? So there's this question actually, in my experience, sort of gets at the heart of an Agile mindset for the kind of Agile that I've experienced and maybe some of y'all have in these circles. This is a quote from that Practical Object-Oriented Design book we just looked at. Sandy says, at an early stage of your project, you cannot possibly get it right. The future is uncertain, and you will never know less than you know right now. And so, this sounds very universal, and some folks in some communities that I've interacted with would argue with this. And so I would agree that, for some people with a certain experience level in certain domains where they're really well known what it is they're building and how it needs to work, I mean, in certain businesses where the way that business needs to work is very well known, you may get it right from the start. But if you're like me, like, this is much more often my experience than getting it all right. And having to think through in advance, having to tell the future, having to decide, like, this is the way my app needs to be flexible, so I'm going to add 3 levels of a class hierarchy, and all these duck types over here, and planning for that kind of flexibility, like, you cannot know in advance. And in my experience, this kind of uncertainty is much more matches my experience day to day and month to month as a developer than that approach that I can get it right from advance. So, like, what a hopeless quote, right? Like, what are we supposed to do? Like, should we go work in another industry instead? The need you really have is for changeability. This is the need that underlies that fear. And at first I had the word flexibility up there, but then someone who gave me feedback said that was kind of risky, because flexibility sometimes is used to mean you design your app up front so that you could plug in a new one of these and change out one of these. But that's telling the future as well. Like, that's trying to decide, I know the ways in which my app needs to be flexible. So in this kind of Agile approach, the encouragement instead is to make code that is just simply handles the needs of the day. Again, listen, we're still talking about user stories, just like the start. Code that is the simplest possible approach for the needs that you have so far. And then as new user stories come in, as new changes come into your app, you make changes to the code to add the flexibility that's needed at that moment in time. And so the practice is really refactoring. It's really a good idea to think about when you hear people use the word refactoring, how it's used. Because it can be used to just mean making changes to code. But the real meaning of refactoring is much more precise than that. It's taking a system, it's covered by tests so you know it's working, making small changes to it that change the structure of the code without changing its external behavior. And they sort of assume that you have tests in place. But this is a way to make small changes safely so you can be confident making those changes. You don't have to make your system flexible in advance. You can change the code to handle the new requirements coming in because you don't know what they're going to be. You can guess, but then you might guess wrong. And so let's look at an example of doing that. Let's look at another part of the create order service object here. So now further down in it, we're sending out an email. And so I've got an order mailer, and I made a method on it just called created. So we have the order object. It's got all the related data it needs. So I just pass that into the order mailer, and I deliver later because I want to do that on a background job. So now a new user story comes in. The client loves this. This is great. And now they say, OK, as a user, I want to be able to receive order notifications by SMS instead of by email. I want an SMS option as well. So looking back at our code here, and obviously this code is not nearly as complicated as the last example. But like, how could we change our code to add support for SMS? You can go a couple different approaches, but how might you change the code to add support for SMS? What's that? I didn't hear you.
Just one line.
What would you do? Yeah, and I thought I might have phrased it poorly. Really, what I meant to say here was, as a user, I want the option to choose whether to receive order notifications by email or by SMS. 2 lines. There you go.
An abstract is something that doesn't tell you how to deliver something that will be defined internally.
Gotcha.
So the simplest way would just be an if-then statement. If SMS, then it's
Yeah, really, those are two closely related different approaches. Go ahead.
Quoting from the Practical Groovy book, duck typing, is there any way to go to these mailers and all create methods called deliver later, and one particular object deliver later will give away mail, and in the other mailer it will deliver SMS?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I think I might actually go a different direction in terms of the names, specifically because mailer in the Rails world tends to very specifically mean email. A raised hand back there.
Yeah, I mean, shouldn't the users be getting a notify? Like, there should be some user somewhere, like, say, like, notify user, and then the user knows how it should be notified.
That's a great point. That actually, that is not quite the, that's even, I think, an additional level of optimization beyond where I went with it. So I will put that in and credit you next time I give this presentation. But yeah, all what y'all are saying is definitely going the same direction. I think if I was to take this step by step in terms of small steps, the first thing I might do is look at this deliver later on here. Like that's a really unique Railsy kind of thing, mailery kind of thing. Like that's not usually what you see. Like when you create an object from scratch, usually you don't call a static method on it, like a class method on it, and then call, well, you might. But that's not too typical. So really, I might just get rid of that and say, I don't have to return from a mailer something. I could call deliver later as a part of that method. And so this kind of isolates the email specific responsibilities in the mailer itself. If you're uncomfortable about the fact that that's not the way mailers, like idiomatic mailers, work in Rails, you could call it something else, like so that it's not obviously a mailer. It's like, oh no, it's your email handler or whatever. But like I'd love to wrap that up so that the create order service object doesn't need to know about that. So this looks like a much more typical just calling a method on a class. And so next after that, I want to inject this dependency. Like I can't just hard code order mailer. If I did the if else, I could certainly do that, and I might do that as a first approach. But I'm still I've still kind of drunk the Kool-Aid of practical object-oriented design, so I might jump straight for a duck type. So I want to inject, and I picked the name Notifier. I was like, well, what are we doing with the users here? Well, whether it's email or SMS, we're notifying them of something. So let's call it a notifier. So we have a named parameter there called Notifier. We pass in order mailer by default, so that way we don't actually have to pass in the parameter. Like our code will continue to work as is, and that's actually a key part of refactoring as well. Is like maybe eventually I get to the point where I don't want to pass in order mailer at all. I don't want to assume what kind of notifier they might have. I might let the user be responsible for that instead. But if I am passing it in, but for now, if I just provide a default order mailer there, then my tests are going to continue to pass. Like that lets me make a small step forward, and then I can make additional changes from there. So once I pass in a notifier and save it in an instance variable, then I can go down here and I can just call that notifier. Incidentally, though, I can run the test in between here, and this seems very unintuitive if you haven't done this kind of refactoring before, and I don't always do it. But if you have a good amount of uncertainty, like say the code's a lot more complex than this, say that's not your code, say it's your first day on the job and you're a junior dev, it's like maybe I'll run the test after every step I take just to make sure that everything's cool. But like at this point, you can run the test again and make sure they still pass. Nothing's changed down here, but like it's just making sure you don't have syntax errors, making sure you haven't overwritten something in the instance variable. But now, okay, tests are passing. Now let me go ahead and replace that hard-coded order mailer with the passed-in notifier instance variable instead. Effectively, it's the same thing at this point because of that default value that's passed into the initializer. Tests still pass, and so now, okay, we're good to go. So now we still have a default order mailer being passed in, but create order is independent. Any kind of notifier it can work with. And so now all we have to do is create a new order texter. That's what I called it. You could call it something else. But it's an object that follows the same, it's the same duck type, like it has the same message, takes a created message, passing an order. And in this case, you just pass through to Twilio or some kind of SMS client that sends out the message, and you can pass in whatever configured values you need. But the point is now we've isolated any email-specific stuff out of our service object there. And we've made it so that it's changeable, and we made the steps in small changes. We didn't have to think about all this in advance. We waited for that user story to come in, and then we made a change as we went. We didn't have to forecast in advance that we knew that we create the concept of notification from the start. Because if you try to create all the abstractions from the start, that's where you end up in a world where you have to go down through 10 classes to see anything happening. And if you've never worked in a system like that, then that is excellent. And please try to keep things that way. Yeah. So the classic book on refactoring is Refactoring. It's intense. I'll just say honestly, when we had a group on refactoring at work, like we did not make it through it. So It's all like 201 or 301 level. But you don't need to get through all the details of the book to get it. Like a lot of these books, the first couple of chapters kind of get the idea. And this describes it more in depth. If you like this idea of not having to design everything up front, being able to design simply for the needs of the day and make changes as new requirements come in, that's a great book to read. So I was applying refactoring. I was able to not think ahead, but just kind of design for the needs of the day. And so life was good. And that's the end of the story, and I lived happily ever after. Of course not. I got worried. Like, what do you think? This isn't a counseling session. This is software development. So yeah, I'm a worrier. Like, I kind of spoiled the story at the start. Like, I'm not going to get all my worries taken away. So I still worry, but I don't worry about the same things anymore. Those worries have more or less been taken away. Like, I don't worry as much about getting done in time. Again, doesn't mean I always get whatever the original estimate is, but there's predictability. I can give people advance notice when things are taking longer than expected. I can make changes with confidence. I don't feel the need to run through the whole app every time I make a change, or just feel bad or scared that something's going to break that I have no idea about. And I feel confident that I can make changes, significant changes to the app, because the tests are covering me, and the tests aren't going to be blowing up 20, 30 tests for each change that I make. So I got worried, but there's real progress. Like these, I've really gone through real worries, and I can't imagine going back now. I can't imagine going back to just manually testing by hand, by trying to think through everything up in advance and just convince myself that I got the design right. So to wind things down and to summarize, I really encourage you to ask, for you or for your team, what are you most worried about right now? Like, is there one of these questions more than the others? I think I forgot to ask who. Yeah, the last question is for anyone, is that a felt need right now? Will I be able to handle future requirements? That's one or two. I remember our conversation about that, yeah. Yeah, that one's a little more rare, although I guess this one was the most rare of all of them. So think about which of these, yeah, you have a comment?
I understand that y'all do this Agile stuff, but what I need is an actual budget. Like, how much is this going to cost and when can it be done?
That sounds like the whole no estimates thing, and that's something I don't know anything about.
That's usually where you get the business pushback on your Agile development shop. So
Yeah.
knowing how to say that, handle that, is as important as knowing the actual how to run the process within your team.
Man, maybe you can do a talk on that some month.
I don't even feel I mastered it.
But the answer is this, right? If you say like you have predictability over a given story, even in an app.
Right, so the law of averages.
And you can total up the number of stories that the client thinks they want. You can give them an estimate. Your estimate will be wrong.
Yeah.
No, but that's okay, because your estimate under any system is going to be wrong.
Right.
It's going to be extremely
Which is why we have velocity, in case anyone ever wondered why you're issue track test.
But as you get stories done, et cetera, you revise your estimate. you
Get stories done
Yeah,
through the team.
So then in their scope, you can say this obviously wasn't in your original estimate. Like, it makes it deal with more. Your estimate is no more wrong than the estimate we give for any other system, because all software estimates are by definition.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Books written over this.
yeah. Well, and this gets it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that sucks. I mean, you can gain anything. At some point, there's a level of trust.
Right.
Or reputation of having delivered upon the team's promises over time.
It ultimately comes down to just buy-in. We have to fight for that buy-in. And training them on velocity and volatility because they actually learn.
Yeah.
In my experience.
Yeah.
That's actually not really the biggest thing. I'm sorry, I don't mean to check this.
Frank, you can have the last word, and then we'll move on.
The second biggest challenge I've had in my career, and I wonder if this has been, is not so much pushback on the process, but the thought that there is a correct price for a piece of software, just like there is a correct price for a car or correct price for a particular home. So like the market has a price for what they want to do. And so someone's describing, metaphorically speaking, describing to you a car. And then so you quote them on a custom built like race car, because that's what they describe. And then they act shocked, and then you find out they actually just wanted to buy a Honda Civic, but they couldn't actually say, those words because that wasn't cool enough.
Nice. I had that. So you're tempting me down so many rabbit trails, but I'll bring this to a close instead. Maybe over beers we can discuss that. So yeah. So is there one of these questions? And so here's the thing that motivated this talk for me. Like reading about these different topics at first, like there was a process, there's a story I had to go through, and at each point in time there was a main worry. Like when I was just worried, will I even get the code done in time? Like I was not thinking ahead, but if I can handle future requirements. I was talking about, can I handle today's requirements? Or yesterday's requirements that were due yesterday. So I had to go through this process, and so I found that I needed user stories before I needed refactoring. And really, I didn't even really understand refactoring until I understood testing much more thoroughly. And so this doesn't mean this is always the sequence, but this is a sequence that I went through. And so I'm hoping it's helpful. So think through, like for these questions, is there one of these questions that you're most worried about right now? And I'll say them just so you have a time to think through them. Will I get the code done in time? Will I break something? When I change something, will lots of tests break? Will I be able to handle future requirements? So is there one of those worries that's like digging at you more than any others? And so if you identify one in that Agile practice that can help, what do? Well, first I'd recommend reading. And specifically, there's a reason I put books up here and not blog posts. I love blog posts. I love RailsConf, RubyConf talks. I bookmark them all the time. But for these practices, like just hearing them once generally is not enough. Like there's a philosophy behind them. And it doesn't sink in overnight. And so your blog posts and talks are great, but getting a really good book and like diving in, letting it sink in really helps. I've probably, Practical Object-Oriented Design in particular, I've probably read it 4 times. Read it once, get initial ideas, go get some experience in Rails, in design, come back again, and now I'm asking new questions. Now I have new worries and new things that it can help with. But just reading is not enough. The other thing I'd recommend is to practice. Try these practices out with people who share the same values, whether they're super experienced or whether they're just getting started as well. Like, try it with whoever you can find. Some of the times that I learn the most in pair programming is from brand new developers. There's a meetup I run way up in North Atlanta, almost to Tennessee, that I live in. And the new developers that have never done test-driven development before, the questions they ask and the insights they have is just amazing. Like, it's helping me understand what I'm doing so much more clearly. So find someone to practice with. If there's someone at work that thinks in an agile way like this, pair program with them. Get them the code review their code. If there isn't anyone at work, then a meetup is a great place to be. So Ruby Hack would be great. When is the next Ruby Hack? I saw July 31st on the website. Is that the right date? I thought there might have been one in June. Check the website. But yeah, check out Ruby Hack. Get together, not just hearing someone like me blab, but getting the code together. There's another meetup in town called Software Craftsmanship Atlanta that's really awesome. It's where I learned a bunch of stuff for my meetup from. Pair programming for half the time at every meetup. They meet on July 5th the next time. So find someone to practice with. Find someone to try it out with as you're going back and forth. Yep.
Next Ruby Hack is July 31st at Taproom Coffee on Jose Williams Drive.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, Ruby Hack, Software Craftsmanship Atlanta. Or at work, find a way to try these things out. What questions do y'all have about all of that? You might have been first.
Yeah, you mentioned 2 things. You mentioned, what is this thing, pair programming?
Oh, yeah. There's other things. There's other practices. Pair programming is, in that original Extreme Programming book, they talked about writing all of your code with somebody else sitting next to you, 2 of you working together. I've never worked. There are places that do that. This place, I think, does that, Pivotal Labs. I've never done that. At work at Big Nerd Ranch, we pair from time to time. So working through a tricky problem, or just I'm remote, just want to get someone else to interact with because you're a remote developer, pair program for a while. On the iOS team, we did it just to learn from each other, trying to get out of our silos. So even just getting together to code without any kind of formal structure around it is a great way to share knowledge, express how you're thinking about code, and it's a great way to learn these things. Patrick.
Okay, so 2 things. One of them is another book that Sandy wrote. It recently came out. I don't know how, like in the past year or something like that. It's 99 Bottles of OOP. She talks a lot about refactoring. It's a really good book. Like none of those things will like read 4 times as you go for the next 4 years or whatever. But so it's like I think in my mind it's more accessible than Mark Fowler's book.
I love that one. I might have not put it up just so it wasn't just Sandy Metz on the screen. Yeah, but I highly recommend 99 Bottles as well.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
book.
Riaz,
Second thing.
oh yeah.
The second thing was
Yeah. I think when we tend to hear the word agile, especially when developers have a bad taste in their mouths with it, it tends to be an agile that's done in such a way that it's exclusively kind of a project management thing. Like the project managers are doing agile, and then agile is done to you as a developer, and you are measured for your velocity, and you are critiqued, or maybe encouraged, I don't know. And that's why I specifically said agile development practices. One of the reasons that I love extreme programming in particular as a specific agile approach, I mean, the word programming is right there in the title. It took me like 2 years after I learned it to notice that. And so it's a very developer-centric approach. Doesn't mean that project managers don't have value, they really do. But for me as a developer, like this is the kind of thing where I can start. Another connection is, in a sense, these development practices, I've heard a number of people say, are sort of the underpinnings for the agile project management practices. So you can work in sprints. You can, have, velocity points and all those other things that I haven't worked in too much. But if you're not applying some of these development practices, keeping your code clean, keeping it tested, then things can slow down more and more over time as you're building up. Like all those other worries kind of come into place. And agile, the sprints just mean that you're just getting these worries faster and faster, and the worries are coming to a head every 1 week or 2 weeks. So I really see the development practices we've been talking about as sort of a foundation. It's like our responsibility as developers. It's the side that we can control and kind of contribute. And in a sense, it's sort of a prerequisite to be able to do some agile project management and project tracking. That's been my experience, at least. Riaz, did you have a question or thought?
Yeah. So I'll preface this with that I'm a huge proponent of Agile. We use it. I think it's at least lesser of two evils, or how many evils there are. But one of the things I've experienced in some cases is it actually exacerbated some problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if maybe you guys have the same experience and have some tactics. So I call this the problem of low requirement fidelity, which was I worked in large companies that did a lot of design up front. So people actually had to have tough discussions on, for example, creating a product page, what should it look like? What things should be on the screen? How should it be laid out? Versus in Agile, they'd be like, well, let me put a one-liner that almost no one can disagree with. Because if we're going to let people do orders, there has to be a page where someone can see the product, right? And then they would delay all those hard discussions, and we would spend way more cycles having to build and then have to show to the client where we built what they asked, but they couldn't agree on what they wanted. Because they sort of had an excuse to say, oh, the process is supposed to be you build something and then we react. And that's actually, it's still longer than a designer or building a prototype type tool to do some of that process ahead of time. So it sort of gave them an excuse to do things that I thought were in some ways less productive. To be like, well, we're just going to not make decisions, and therefore we never know that the software is done because the goal is supposed to be flexible. It's supposed to be show us something and then we respond. Is that something anyone else has had experience with? I'm curious to what you guys have done to kind of tackle that.
Sorry. Yeah.
I'm just going to ask, have you just pulled design into the process, made them an integral part of the team, made them iterate with your team?
Well, I mean, if you're working with a large client, the answer is generally no, that's not Agile. Agile is we kind of give you something really basic, you build something that we respond to, and we go forward, right? Like that is actually closer to Agile than just doing a bunch of design in front.
So Mark Fowler has like really hit this hard, I think, and some of the talks I've seen him give, where he says like when he was talking about Agile, because Agile he was one of the science of the Agile Run Festival, he was like from the beginning, and he says, okay, because you're doing Agile does not mean you don't go and talk through all these problems. And so you go and have this discussion, and you like build that, and you interrogate it, and you figure that stuff out, and you describe what the product is going to be, and like how you see the future coming. You just don't hold yourself to it. But you let that evolve, and you maybe have another discussion about that later. You just don't. You can have some vision. You discuss it, right? So I've had the same problem doing it myself, thinking that I'm supposed to only think about this week and what is going on this week. But it's been really hard because I want to know what's going to happen, and I'm making decisions every time I make a decision. It's about like the future of the product and like how I see it happening, right? And so when I go and start trying to make those decisions, I want to be discussing that with the product owner and like how like in and like whoever that's my team. And like, do we think this is going the right way? Do we think this is the way you see it the way I'm seeing it? And I think having those discussions helps make those decisions that are required now. And having product owners and stuff like that that are available like facilitates that. It's critical. I think absolutely critical. So, but I guess I just wanted to say that Martin Fowler, like one of these guys, right? He does not say, not sorry, it's not I said Martin Fowler, I meant Uncle Bob. Uncle Bob's been saying this. So the idea is, like he's saying, go and interrogate it. Just plan what you're doing this week. The work can get done this week. You can make decisions about stuff, but allow them to move and agilely maneuver and evolve. I get that's what I'm saying.
But it sounds to me like a key part of that might be missing is if you don't have product owners and design iterating with you and on your team, if they're either stakeholders or some third other thing as a part of your client, then they can't iterate with you, so it's going to be hard to be in sync and have this conversation.
So the other thing I was going to say is that it's kind of like, I look at this kind of like a game theory kind of thing where like, every project is different. If you're going to build a piece of software for 1 million users, that's one kind of like context. If you're doing a startup product, that's one. If you're building a thing for enterprise, that's another. Right? So like each one of those has got a different goal. And if like you're trying to do the next Amazon.com, maybe you need to have design discussions up front and really get it right the first time. If you're trying to develop a startup, maybe you don't because like you need to get out the door for like 50 grand and you can't spend all your time just like dreaming up ideas. Maybe an enterprise has been more reliable. So it's like every situation's got a different reason around why it is you're trying to accomplish a certain goal. So like the activity around like how you do Agile is different. Like the core idea of having like fast feedback is important, but what you're getting that fast feedback on, how it relates to the business and context of the problem is different in each case. You may have a lot of design in the Amazon.com kind of example, but like you wouldn't need that for other situations.
So the question is, where do you want to go to market? To follow. Right. So you go to your client, and your client's talking to you. Well, what do you want to go to market with? Are you willing to go to market with something that maybe doesn't look like what you want? That maybe you want to redesign later? In that case, we're going to go developer heavy up front. We're going to get the functionality out. It's going to be, it might be butt ugly, but it will be in the marketplace and use. If there's no way, it's got to be slick, it's got to be chrome, it's got to be perfect, fine. UX heavy team. Right. There's a lot more wireframing in those early iterations where UX can lay up wireframes much faster than developers can. That look like a website, interact like a website, have nothing on it. So we get the design right, because that's the thing you said was important. You said it had to be chrome, it had to be perfect. So it's the question to the client is, what are you, and it's an upfront question, what are you willing to go to market with? What's more, does it have to be pretty? If it has to be pretty, UX heavy team up front. If it can be kind of clunky, and the functionality is the key thing, when you market with first, develop it. It's a discussion that has to be had with the client.
I'm glad y'all have good answers because I did not have any good answers for that question. That's awesome. Yeah.
Over communicate. Communication's key.
Yeah. Other thoughts, questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's one of the struggles with projects like this, Agile, is knowing the team and what constitutes a team. Is it front-end developers, back-end developers, front-end designers, user experience people, and then there are all sorts of other requirements as well, search engine optimization, and all sorts of other things too that are involved. So the composition of the team is something that is, I think, difficult to do, but then kind of can evolve depending on the state of or the part of the project that you're on at the time. So
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a different level of agile management that we probably can't get into here, but yeah, it's definitely a complexity, and if done right, things work really well. If done wrong, you wind up kind of hitting roadblocks.
There's a theme that this reminds me of in Kent Beck, Martin Fowler, Uncle Bob, maybe a little less Uncle Bob, I'm not sure. A theme of, hey, try these practices out, other practices in the book, see what works for you, like see what your felt need is. And at first I was like, well, that's great humility. Like they're not going to burden you up front, like they really know their stuff. But it's like, no, figure out what's right for you. But I've come to realize like these folks really believe that. Like they really believe different contexts are different. Like the needs of different industries, needs of different teams, they really differ. And it's a part of an extreme programming approach to really embracing developers as people. That we're not interchangeable cogs in a wheel that you might feel like at large companies if they're run poorly. But that our skills as craftspeople really matter. And that we're going to produce good work if we are reasonably enjoying our jobs instead of being run ragged for 80 hours a week. And so whether it's the individuality of the team and the project, like that's just a common theme that I see from them, and it's probably pretty frustrating if you're in a crunch and you need answers. But I think it's a flexibility that aligns with the messiness and the uncertainty of the real world of development. So that's kind of one of those deeper philosophical things that I was talking about. But I heard that theme, and that's why each of y'all had different insights about team composition, different possibilities. If your needs are like this, here's something you might do. Be cool to see. I'd love to see, at Big Nerd, we have teams generally set up in a certain way. We get projects, as consultants in a certain way. It'd be interesting to hear stories from some of y'all in future months about what kind of teams you work on, how you do agile development, or don't even call it agile development, but just how you do it and what works for you. Other thoughts, questions, insights? Yeah.
So on your slide for how to refactor the test to make it more maintainable, you get more of like a modernist approach.
Yes.
More steps and models. I guess how would you? I guess why did you choose that over using more like a factory girl, kind of like real objects?
Mm-hmm. It's more just what I'm familiar with. I've come up through a sort of mockist approach to things, and I've had less opportunities to learn from the more classicist approach. I would actually love, if I may put you on the spot, to look at that slide real quick, and if you had ideas for ways I could go about that, and I could try it out sometime. Let me see if I can find it. Should I go back further, or you want to? Yeah.
Subgraph of your problem domain that you create that are like there's no mocks, there's no steps, and that is like a sort of pre-canned sort of thing that we can build for this one test. So that does reduce the initial setup of this test, where it's like the user of the card line on maybe coupon or things that Factory Growth provides as like a scenario, and then the rest of your test is using steps or mocks.
Right.
You have the simplicity of if you have your attribute user card line on as well as coupon. Maybe you don't have to change any test, you change your factor definition. It has a new attribute. All the tests continue to work as they normally would. The core concept of it is this test works with a valid configuration of those four things. And then maybe you have other tests where it's what if my card's invalid and the other things are valid? What if what if my coupon has been used already? So you take your valid base case and change one thing. So that's a different approach to this kind of testing.
Yeah, that approach is a totally valid a way to reduce the coupling of this test to details. By centralizing things in those factory girl. What's the term for when you have different named things? Is it traits? Yeah. You name different things. Like it is a valid user, or it's it is a amount coupon, or it's a percentage coupon, or something like that. That's a valid way to reduce the details there. Some of the trade-offs involved with that are you are hitting real objects, and so you are getting kind of some extra validation there of, okay, these pieces are actually working together. So that's kind of nice. I think that, and you may very well know of approaches that would prevent this. I think a minor downside might be if you make it, if you make the change to the signature of one of these objects. You may, if you literally make that change before changing any tests, you may have a number of tests fail all at once. But then, if you go in there and you see the pattern, you just fix the first one by changing factory girl. Oh, cool, they're all passing again. That's all fine. So that's not too much of a downside. So yeah, I'm actually really glad you brought that up, because I've been thinking a lot in the last couple of years of those two different approaches to testing and pros and cons. But yeah, it's not that a mockist approach necessarily provides a better solution for this point. That's a great insight.
You're talking about changing the signature. So for instance, if you have instance double and payment processors an actual object in your application code, it will recognize whether or not it actually has a method. Name whatever you're going to call. So it's that process. Whatever the processor takes inside of the create order, it will throw if it doesn't actually have that method.
Right.
It's specifically due to RSpec having a watcher on instance double. change, or the process to receive change when it's passed in the create order.
Right. Actually, I'm glad you said that because that reminded me of something else I was going to say, is that a mockist approach like this, and I think I might have mentioned this last time I was here a year ago or whenever. So if you're using a factory girl approach, you can remove some of these details, reduce that coupling, and things would kind of work fine just as is. One thing that's interesting is a factory girl approach might, my animations, come on, man. It looks so beautiful at the time, and now I'm trying to get through it. Do I actually want to go back? I want to go back, I think, because I want to get back to the code. So a factory girl approach might actually make it easier to leave the create order service object with these total details in here. And so in that case, the tests themselves are not exerting a pressure to remove this detail out the way a mockist test would. And so that's actually one of the key differences of approach that uses a lot of mocks, is that it exerts a design pressure on your objects towards simplifying things out and having more objects that have intelligence in them. And that's not necessarily better. In my career before getting into Ruby, I was way at the other extreme of just long procedural code. So I'm very excited about having lots of small objects and the value that mockist tests are doing and kind of leading me that way. And so I think it's really, like, if you get familiar with those two different approaches to testing, you can just get a feel for how they tend to lead your designs and what approach you like. For different, again, like different contexts, for different projects, for different people and teams, you may prefer one approach or the other.
I would say that, like, really lousy and hard to maintain factories are design pressure of themselves.
They're terrible.
So,
That's what I think is entire time.
so if, but the point being that, like, if you have a factory where you're like, oh man, I have to set up like a billion things, it's got a bunch of, that also indicates to you that, like, if it's hard to build a factory to set up your object, this is a bad object. And so I think that, like, whereas the pressure for better design might not come from the same place,
Yeah,
it's still there.
that's great.
It's just coming from, like, maintaining your factory and, like, looking at your factory.
Having heavily used both approaches, I think it's sort of a wash because you do get that design pressure from factories or that design pressure from mocking things properly. So I think that's sort of a wash. The real question is, would you prefer to maintain factories or maintain tests? To me, that's even kind of a wash at the same time. So it's really a preference thing to me at the end. As long as you invest in doing either one properly.
And I feel like in either one you could fall into the trap of saying, I just got to write my tests better, or I just got to write my factories better, instead of understanding. And I didn't get this at first. I had to learn it and see examples from my coworkers. But like learning that, this can, if I change the design of my production code, that is what will reduce this, and that's what the tests or the factories are trying to tell me. So yeah, thank you guys so much for helping me see the parallels there. That's really neat. That'd be good for us to close it down. I'm going to be around to chat. Hit me up on Twitter anytime. You can tell I love talking about this stuff, and I love learning from you guys. I probably had a thank you slide on here with my contact info. We'll get there eventually. Thank you guys so much. Thank you. Like this.
This video has been sponsored by Rieta Incorporated. Learn more today at RIET.